Welcome to the Copenhagen History Project. My name is Patrick and the project is meant to show the fantastic history of the city of Copenhagen. In today's video I'd like to talk about this, perhaps the most beautiful building in Copenhagen, depending on taste. This is the Marble Church as it's known, but it's not really actually called the Marble Church. This is the Frederik's Church. And the reason that it's called the Frederik's Church is that it's located in the Frederik's district, which was founded by Frederik V. The Marble Church has a really interesting and funny history, and in many ways it's basically Copenhagen's answer to Sagrada Familia, since it was started and conceptualized many hundreds of years ago, and is actually not finished too long ago in relative terms, and is far younger than what people actually mostly think. The foundation of this new beautiful church was actually a far larger church that was supposed to be part of the new Copenhagen project, the Sankt Anne city. And the Sankt Anne city was Christian IV's ambitious project for doubling the size of Copenhagen from the old medieval city size to the now far larger combined city of old medieval city with the Sankt Anne city that stretched all the way to Kastellet, the citadel. And in this new city he wanted a large church called the Rotunda. And the Rotunda was such an ambitious and enormous project that it never materialized. Unfortunately, I cannot show how this church would have looked like because of the 130,000 pictures and depictions that the Museum of Copenhagen has online. There are no such depictions of the Rotunda. What I did find was a map that shows where the church was built, and it was in fact built, it was just never finished. And I would like to just perhaps describe how this would have looked like. It's described as an amphitheater with a diameter of 63 meters. And just to compare that, the Peter's Church in Rome has a dome that is 42 meters. So this is quite a lot larger, right? Unfortunately, as with so many other things during Christian IV's reign, the whole city of Sankt Anne and the project building out the bastions and defense works and the rotunda coincided with several wars with the Swedish, wars that Denmark lost. Unfortunately, as I said, this meant that the city was never finished and the rotunda either. This, however, would be a very great foundation for Frederik V, who later, as a far richer king in peacetime in the 1700s of Denmark, decided that now was the time to finish the project of Christian IV and created Frederiksstaden. Frederiksstaden, or Frederik City, or Frederikshavn, is an interesting district of Copenhagen in that it was both thought out, carried out and executed in a really short time in 1749 to celebrate the 300th anniversary of the House of Oldenburg as reigning in Denmark. If you look at the map of how this city was planned, there are two really defining aspects of it. One of them is Amalienborg, the current residency of the royal family, and then the idea of the Marble Church. So apparently it would take 16 different drawings of the Marble Church before they agreed on the right design. And the right design was more or less inspired by a guy called Nikolai Eigtved, who spent 12 years studying in other countries. And for that reason, the dome especially of the Marble Church look a lot like the Peter's Church in Rome. And perhaps the fact that Eigtved died quite young and only got to make 4 of the 16 drawings for it was essentially what then created a lot of the problems. Because instead of Eigtved, they ended up with a French guy who was called Nicolas Henri Jardin, and he was a big spender and perhaps a little bit mad. The king wanted the church inside and out to be made of Norwegian marble, and so this guy decided that it was perhaps just easier if the walls were marble all throughout, which was obviously incredibly expensive. This led to the construction being halted in 1770, and to understand just why that happened, perhaps we need to just go a little bit, take a step back and understand the power structure of Denmark at the time. At the time, Denmark was an absolute monarchy, and that meant that Christian VII had absolute power in the country. However, Christian VII was completely mad, and he had a doctor called Struensee, and Struensee was the real guy who had power at the time. Struensee was a man of enlightenment. There's a really good movie about this. It's called The Royal Affair, and I definitely recommend everyone to see that. Struensee was a man of enlightenment, and he was not going to spend a fortune on a church made entirely of Norwegian marble, so he halted it in 1770. This led to a 106 years break in construction where the church, now 19 meters tall, was just standing there with marble blocks still lying around in storage until the finance, perhaps the real industrialist of Denmark, Tietgen, decided to rebuild the church. Now it was time to resume construction. And Tietgen is an absolutely crazy character in Danish industrialization. He essentially almost kickstarted industrialization in Denmark. He's the Danish answer to JP Morgan, Carnegie, and Rockefeller at the same time. He started a bank, he started shipping companies and railroad companies. He also started Danish sugar companies and also the telegraph company that was the Danish answer to General Electrics. So this guy was very, very productive. And I think it says a lot about the expense of this church, like how incredibly expensive it was to continue the project that was thought by Jardin, the French guy, that Tietgen completely changed the approach to how this church both had to be built to afford it, but also how to finance it. And so I apologize if I ruin the illusion here, but the upper half of the marble church is actually built by brick and sandstone, and the inside of it, some of it is drywall. And I think it's sort of interesting. I already noticed this before I actually started reading about this, that if you stand from the outside and look at it, it looks like there are spaces, empty spaces that were meant for something different. Like on the side of it, you see like these frames that could have been for some sort of decoration, or like there are other places, but they are just empty. And also on the side of the facade, you see something that looks like it was meant to be more than what it is. And this is sort of a compromise. So I think it's interesting to see that you can already see this if you look really closely at the church without necessarily needing to read on it. And what I found out when I started reading about it was essentially why that was the case, because I actually didn't know all of that. Now, regardless of changing the material of the church and perhaps skipping a few steps, Tietgen built a incredibly beautiful church. And in order to finance this, he decided to build apartments in the area of the church grounds that were no longer needed, because obviously the church was a little bit smaller now than what was initially thought it should be. And these apartments financed the building of the church, and to this day they are, of course, absolutely stunning, and the location is prime, and they are some of the most expensive property you can buy in Denmark. Now, I think an actual funny story of the marble church is that it's obviously quite a popular place to have ceremonies like weddings at. And due to this, you can only be married in the marble church if you live within the parish of the marble church. And due to so many churches being in Copenhagen, the parishes are quite small. And so it's only actually the people that live very close to it, and in other words, it's the richest people, because this is the most expensive area in Copenhagen. It's only those people that can actually be married there. So people will drive up to the marble church and have their photo taken next to it as a marriage photo, because they want the beautiful church that we have here, the marble church, in the background. And I think this speaks volumes of the beauty of this church. This church is both from the outside, you can see it from air photos. It's just absolutely, it stands out. And also when you go in there, it's a circular building and it has a huge dome. Everything in there is just really beautiful, and it gives a very special feeling. And when I bring foreign friends, I feel they are surprised that there's not a line to get in there, or that you have to pay a museum fee, because it's just a church, you can just enter it. And this is just absolutely perhaps one of the, I think, most underrated, not underrated, but understated perhaps, landmarks of Copenhagen. Now, one last thing I think I'd like to highlight is the real fun fact that this is not called the Marble Church. Everyone knows it as the Marble Church, and that's not the real name. The real name is the Frederik's Church. And this is perhaps just a random thing, but when they built the metro station, when they built the new metro is a couple of years old now, and when they built the metro station under the Marble Church, it's actually not called the Frederik's Church, that station is called the Marble Church. And that raised a few eyebrows around, because why would you name something a station after a place that essentially doesn't exist on paper? But I think also as a marketing man, that sort of makes sense, because if you had just named it the Frederik's Church, people would have been perhaps less understanding of where that actually was. We have the Nikolai Church, we have the Church of Trinity, we have the Church of Our Virgin, and we have a lot of different churches. Christian's Church, Frederik's Church, all kinds of churches, right? And if you'd name this church or this station, the metro station, after a place that people don't know the real name of, rather than what they perceive to be the Marble Church, they would probably have been even more confused. So I think I'm not sure this is controversial anymore, but apparently it was at the time they built it and named it. But I think this was the right decision. Anyways, this was a little bit of the story of the Marble Church, and also the incredible power and the accumulation of power and money that it takes to initiate, start, and even perhaps just get the idea of ridiculous church projects in Copenhagen. Maybe we should call the video that instead. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.